week that began with the abrupt firing of Tucker Carlson and the sedition case against the Proud Boys for January 6th reaching a jury. And then just last night, we reported that Mike Pence went under oath for the first time about the coup probe to the DOJ. That was yesterday. So each of those are distinct developments, but I want to tell you, each stem from the ongoing, if tardy, accountability for the insurrection. Fox News reeling from a record payout for election and insurrection lies, which former host Tucker Carlson had doubled down on recently, which certainly contributed to his problems. And amidst all this heat on the efforts to undermine the peaceful transfer of power to President Biden back then, we should note that this week, the current president formally announced he is running for re-election in a video that discusses and shows what he says are the stakes. And I'll tell you something. Usually when the incumbent president announces he's running for re-election, it feels like a larger story. But it has certainly had its competition. Donald Trump, meanwhile, unveiling a reboot of the campaign slogan that he originally plagiarized from Ronald Reagan, although now he's added the fighting words that evoke a battle, an us versus them battle.
One man focused on the true owners of this great land. One movement focused on the true priorities. Make America great for us again.
For us. Who's us? Well, that stark campaign pitch comes with Trump in New Hampshire and against the backdrop I mentioned yesterday. The highest-ranking member of the Trump administration to date to testify, Mike Pence, rode his motorcade in to do that, to discuss under oath how Donald Trump tried to overthrow their loss. Mike Pence is literally driving up to finally cough up the facts about that effort. The DOJ probe must do more than just talk to everybody. If there's going to be other additional charges, they must determine whether Donald Trump broke any federal laws by trying to steal that election. That means probing his intent, his state of mind. Did he intend to incite that insurrection? Did he view those now convicted trespassers and seditionists as his co-conspirators? Or in the alternative, in all fairness, if you're trying to understand what happened, did they act completely on their own? Was he surprised or even opposed to some of what they did or all of it? Did they commit crimes that cannot be legally tied to Donald Trump? Now, everyone is welcome to their own views on that, but the DOJ and Special Counsel Jack Smith, they need evidence for that. They need hard, provable indications about Trump and how he viewed that plot and the violence, and if possible, the January 6 convicts themselves. Well, Donald Trump, a defendant now in New York on a different case and a candidate out there on the trails I showed you, just handed investigators more damning evidence about his state of mind, his view of those Jan 6ers, as he calls them. Because he embraced one of the people who defied police amidst that crime spree by Trump fans, which Pence was just testifying about. This is new. And this new embrace comes along with Trump's public vow to pardon some of these convicts and also efforts to promote them as a kind of sympathetic set of political prisoners.
Here, take this. Thank you. Thank you, sir. And you just take care of yourself. Thank you. I'm good. I got it. Thank you, President.
Hang in there. You might get a pardon, and Donald Trump has certainly shown in the past a willingness to pardon people who commit political crimes on his behalf, who are convicted of that. So the past isn't over. Not at the DOJ, not in that probe, not for Pence, who faces this new pressure, not for Trump, who is clearly mixing his re-election with that kind of rhetoric, those kind of embraces. The past isn't over for Fox News or Tucker Carlson, who are quite literally paying this week and last week for their election lies and defamation. It's not over for America, the Republican Party, which has had a Trump problem that has now become a sedition problem. And with party leaders in the GOP, who whatever they've claimed or said privately, whatever some of them initially said on January 6th, 7th, and 8th, now minimize or even warm towards the trespassers, the seditionists, the traitors. So here we are in this first official week of President Biden's re-election campaign. It is worth connecting the dots, connecting that GOP problem to a history that already showed Donald Trump was a huge mathematical drag on this party as we look at the matchup. Because as one nonpartisan outlet recently put it, Axios, Trump-aligned and MAGA candidates have been on a documented and epic losing streak that dates back to those first 2018 midterms.
The prospect of Democrats getting upwards of 40 seats looms very large right now.
Democrats picked up more than 24 House seats to take control for the first time in 8 years.
The moment the entire country has been waiting for after a very close race.
Joseph R. Biden Jr. is elected the 46th president of the United States, winning the White House and denying President Trump a second term.
Breaking news out of Georgia. NBC News now projects that Democrat Raphael Warnock has won the Senate runoff election.
Both Democrats have won those 2 seats.
The Democrats will regain control of the U.S. Senate.
Definitely not a Republican wave, that's for darn sure.
The red wave, if at most, has become sort of a red trickle.
We put that together. That's not the part of news or politics that's debatable or contestable in these endless arguments. That's all just math. Even before the insurrection fundamentally revealed Donald Trump to be against democracy, which some of his allies and some of his voters had either disbelieved or denied prior to that, and even before this recent indictment, which, let's be clear, indictments are generally not popular in electoral terms, although legally he is presumed innocent and will get his trial if he goes to trial. But even before all that, those were the documented mathematical failures of a Trump-led Republican Party. It's a losing streak well known to the party's leaders and elders and professional class and pollsters. And right now, Trump and Biden are, of course, still the clear leaders for the nomination of their parties. You see Trump there against the few declared alternatives or potential alternatives. And top GOP donors eyeing this have recently been publicly warning about whether the party really should go down this Trump road again next year.
Part of the problem, I don't think there's any question in my mind, that hurt Republicans all over, is Donald Trump.
Some were also knuckleheads with strange beliefs and closets full of problems. Many of these remarkably weak candidates came courtesy of Donald Trump.
There's a very high correlation between MAGA candidates and big losses.
A true leader understands that it's time to step off the stage.
Going into 2024, the Republicans are going to be looking for candidates who are focused on winning, not just making a point or settling a score.
We have a tremendous opportunity going forward. Donald Trump should not be a part of that. I just wish he would ride off into the sunset.
Governor DeSantis is the biggest single winner of the night, and he will almost certainly become the rallying point for everybody in the Republican Party who wants to move beyond President Trump.
I mean, I think Trump's kind of a drag on our ticket. I think Donald Trump gives us problems politically.
Trump needs to take a good look in the mirror.
All right. Those were all conservative Republican voices. But does looking in the mirror work if you're in denial or politically blind? That's, I guess, the deeper question. And Trump has to be clear and factual. And this gets forgotten. Even before, as I said, he was indicted and before the insurrection, Trump has never won more votes than a Democrat when he's on the ticket. And the MAGA midterms were a bust for the GOP in 2018 and then the recent 2022 midterms. And that doesn't mean it's smooth sailing for anybody. Joe Biden, who's just announced this week he's running for re-election, has faced inflation and economic problems that have not exactly steadied. He also faces what is documented as lackluster approval. We covered this recently on the program. He's consistently below 50%, which is not historically a great number. And then you have a huge share of the public who say they don't want Biden to run again. And if you compare it in all mathematical fairness, it is actually a larger share suggesting Biden doesn't run again than who say that about Trump, although both numbers are incredibly high. So here we are on this very busy news week where, again, if you hadn't heard, the president's running for re-election. And if you hadn't heard, the guy he beat is embracing insurrectionists, going out on campaign trips, talking about basically continuing exactly what we just showed you and what the Republican Party knows has not worked. Let me put it to you like this. It feels like we are living through an intensely odd time. a time where so many of the things we went through, from that pandemic to the civil rights resurgence to the insurrection itself, have taken longer than people thought to be absorbed and figured out. And yet, as a factual matter, not here to cheer you up on a Friday, but as a factual matter, that accountability and some of the improvements, at least if we define improvement as doing things the American way through our system and our rule of law, the improvements have been coming. Major accountability for an attack on democracy that was initially undercharged and underpunished. And then, as I mentioned, the odd feeling, if you measure what people are saying, everyone's fighting about everything. Everyone disagrees about everything, right? You ever feel like that? And yet, where do we have a national consensus? Well, way above 50%, to the tune of 60 and 70%, a national consensus that people want, they say, new, alternative options for the White House than the two leading ones. And that's part of this moment. And then against that, we have the signs of, no one can predict the future, but currently what looks like a very likely rematch of these two men who not only clashed last time against that once-in-a-century pandemic and these large questions about our future, but at a time where we saw that American democracy, the peaceful transfer of power itself, was tested like never before. Not because of the way things went down, not because of congressional bickering, not because of the false equivalence narrative that you sometimes hear pitched by people who either like the system the way it is or are too lazy to tell you the truth. It was tested because of Donald Trump and his allied seditionists, some of whom, the Proud Boys, are on trial, waiting right now tonight and into next week to see if a jury sends them away for a long time. We have more on that later. But against all of that is the numbers I just showed you, the Republicans' nightmare math. Handing the ball again to someone who always misses. I mean, if this were basketball, and we don't do a lot of sports analogies on this show, you would not pass this guy the ball. Donald Trump has never won more votes. He has never been a help in the other races, the midterms, as I showed you. And that's just according to the math and what his own Republican allies say. And by the way, he's never won even as he was caught lying and cheating along the way, from Ukraine to now this infamous insurrection. And he is now, if nothing else, weaker under that same math as an indicted, sedition-aligned candidate to be your president again.